another boot camp. To recap the boot camp, we began the morning. One activity that I think is essential to do that we did today was we performed an assessment, a paired self-assessment while completing Core 1 exam practice. So while completing a practice exam, I had them do it in pairs so they could discuss questions and go through and review them together. I paired them in so that they could support each other. One who was maybe a little bit stronger than the other one, but still collaborative on sharing resources. That, I think, was an important part. If I couldn't get those pairs, I don't think I would have done the pairing that way. After they reviewed resources, I had them then identify 10 areas which were a challenge to them, whether they were a topic, a process, some vocabulary, something that they got incorrect on the exam, something that they know they needed to review. So essentially, they started doing the review, finding those areas of their greatest need, and going from there. An important part of this process, I think, is them just discussing concepts, discussing things they have right or wrong, discussing concepts, discussing things that they got right or wrong, and improving their answers. So I heard a lot of good questions between them, a lot of good clarifications between them. Some of them were able to finish, some of them were not. And I said to them, that's okay. It's more or less, we're going to look at what you got correct. So at the conclusion of the 90 questions, I then asked them to identify 10 areas each. And then I took the 10 areas and I created a study guide based on the 10 areas, and then also some core vocabulary from the Core 1 and the Core 2. And then I developed some study sheets for them. We also had a nice long discussion around when to take the test, to take it as potentially a small group so that we make sure that we're getting to the next step. And ultimately, there was a really good conversation that I felt like I needed to have with them around resiliency and anxiety, and how having anxiety seldom is an action-based kind of experience. I didn't say this to them, but in reality, it is. Anxiety happens a lot. People have test anxiety, they have academic anxiety, they have life anxiety, things that are happening or ways they're feeling. But I wanted them to realize that a lot of this anxiety is based on their moment to moment, how their perception of how they're feeling about taking an exam, their perception about their preparation and their readiness for an exam. And what I spoke to them and said to them is I need them to take an approach that it's not so much about approaching it thinking being anxious. They need to think about it as a long-term project. They need to think about it as something that they're so consistent with each day, like a job or something else, that they ultimately can reduce some of that anxiety, and the preparation helps replace some of those anxious feelings. So these students, in their efforts to prepare for this exam, need to recognize that their preparation needs to be like a part-time job. It needs to be like something where they know they're dedicating 2 to 3 hours per week to address what they need to know in a way that's going to make a productive experience for them. And I told them that the better that they take on the responsibility and apply resilience to the experience, the more prepared they're going to feel and the less anxiety they're going to have around any one instance of anything at all. So I think it's really important that students, or anyone really, recognize that the more you prepare, the more you understand the long-term work involved with a project, the less anxious you're going to be about it. I'm not going to say it's going to go away. It's going to exist until you feel comfortable with the process related to it. But you need to think about that process. Now, where resiliency really kicks in here is I had to explain to the students that in preparation for the exam, they're currently doing exam preparation. They're taking taking a course, they need to realize that this is important time. They're committing hours upon hours each week towards preparation for this exam. That time needs to go towards something. It needs to go towards active preparation. And they need to be prepared to put and continue to put 2.5 to 3 hours minimum per week towards preparation. Now, even after they put this preparation in, they need to be prepared to fail. And that failure is often the first step to success, and that they may need to fail in order to get to the next step. And it was interesting, I had a student in my class when we were talking after we discussed this, that it's tough that our society, we don't discuss how okay it is to fail sometimes, and how being okay with failure helps set up success. And that's definitely the scenario with this type of preparation. And you need to be prepared to fail so that you can get to the next step with anything that you're looking to do. And people are so critical, and failure brings on so much anxiety that it blocks the ability to see that process clearly. And that's really tough, because it's really essential that you see making mistakes or seeing where you're at or self-assessing your knowledge is an important step. And I think this is really also important with certifications, as learners who maybe done a 2-year or a 4-year degree or no degree at all, stating that failure in a professional course is about learning and about understanding what you need to know to be successful. And it feels like an academic experience, but it's truly one that relies more on actual professional awareness and professional preparation towards understanding what you know and don't know. And I tell many people at the beginning of this particular course, actually, the difference between this and a regular academic course is I'm not preparing you to get a grade as much as I'm preparing you to take a test. So that is a professional endeavor in many respects. And it's just interesting. I think an additional point that came from the conversation I had with the student was how in the process of being successful with a task like a certification, it's important to recognize your place with the certification, like your knowledge of the content area, your preparation, your readiness. If you're not where you need to be, it's up to you to take the professional responsibility to address that and not allow anxiety to creep in and separate you from your goal, if that makes sense. I think that's an important step that you really need to keep in mind, you really need to have fresh, is just how important it is to maintain your resiliency, your readiness, and your willingness to adapt to the scenario that you need to in order to be prepared. And it's going to pay dividends all through life, your ability to be adaptable and ready for these different types of environments, because you're going to have experiences which play into other ones. So the sooner you take on an experience which forces you to adapt and modify how you live, think, study, and prepare and learn, the better you're going to be prepared for the next one, if that makes sense. The better you're going to be prepared to adapt how you think. And that's what you need to know how to do, because that's going to make you the most valuable to the organization you work for, the most personally satisfied, because you're going to have the bandwidth for understanding things at greater depth, and you're going to just be happier. So that, I would say, that's my nuts and bolts download from today's boot camp. The nice thing about today's boot camp, I think, was we didn't focus maybe as much on career development skills as in the past. And not that that's a nice thing, but I think for these students, we focused on question preparation, some hands-on components to get them thinking about their next step with taking the exam, which was important, and hashed out a lot of the feelings to a certain extent. I think you have to hash out the feelings and place an ownership and accountability on people to perform the thing that they're preparing themselves for, and not to allow self-doubt to creep in and to allow other things that can block a person's progress to creep in when it's up to them to evolve and develop as a person, and not to make excuses for themselves, which can be a person's worst enemy, is the excuses they make for themselves. So I think we got there with this group, which was super valuable. So thanks for checking out the video. Please give it a like and subscribe if you appreciate the content. I'll have more CompTIA content, as well as edtech and various other topics on digital futures education.